Welcome students for the online NPTEL course of on visual communication design for digital media. So in the lecture before this, we have discussed the detailed methodology of visual design part of the methodology of animation and game design. In this lecture, we will talk about the visual design part of web based application and website designs. So visual design part for web based platform. So if we think about the broader methodological phases, first is interaction design or user experience design or human computer interaction design, from where we get the information architecture, which is mainly the part of user experience or human computer interaction designers, but which is very closely linked with visual communication design part of the website design. So information design, what is information design and how it is done, that we will discuss in the lecture series as well. Though it is not part of, mostly it is not part of visual communication design, which involves the domain of designers from the domain of user experience designer or interaction designer or human computer human computer interaction designers. These are generally in design domain, these are used in a similar for a similar connotation, but the visual communication designers work comes after the information architecture is done. But in the small, in some small firm, visual communication designer and interaction designer, they work together, and then they sometimes there might be the only one person who also does the visual communication design, the visual design for web application, also who conducts the user experience design or interaction design process of the web design. And from that we get the higher fidelity design, information architecture or a paper prototype, which is the lower fidelity design of web based platform, and higher fidelity design is the colored version, and with all the UI transitions and every detailing of every visual detailings of this, which is the next part where user experience designers involve visual communication designers as well. And the next part is development of the website, that is the domain of web developers, that is out of the scope of discussion of this course. So if we look into the different phases and the tools and techniques followed for that and the deliverables. So this is the detail of this, and in the previous lecture we also discussed the generic design methodology. When we started discussing the design methodology, we discussed the generic design methodology and the different forms of design methodologies like iterative design, waterfall model of design, and here we are discussing the mostly the iterative model of design. And there we can see the first stage is user research. We start with the ethnography, that is the bottom up approach or the inductive process of design. We start with the user, we find out what is their need. So that is the deliverable, what exactly has to be designed, that actually users tells us. From users research, by observing them, we understand what is the need of the research, need of the final outcome. So for that, the tools and techniques we apply is making persona, making then scenario building, and through the process of ethnographic survey we observe the user, we do the user research. So this individual things will be discussed in this lecture series, in this lecture. So the next process from user research stage is the design stage. After finalizing the need in the that is the deliverable of the user research stage, we move on to the design stage. We start with the design. Also we have seen in the first the starting lecture of visual design methodology, the double diamond method of Donald Norman. There we see the defining the problem. Defining the problem is actually what Donald Norman was saying is the need identifying the need of the user and finding what has to be designed. So next we are starting the design stage, that is the next part of the diamond. If you go back to that lecture and see what the model is, then we this is the next stage, the next part of the diamond, which is the design stage. In the design stage, the tools and techniques which we follow is, first we start with the low fidelity design. Low fidelity design is the first stages of design where the which has to be done very quickly, and where less money is involved, less manpower, less time is involved. That is the first stages of design, when design didn't form up, design didn't form to the final stage, that is the low fidelity design stage. And as we go towards the timeline and also the manpower and cost increases, we move on to the high fidelity design. Then design turns to come up to a particular shape. So that is going towards the high fidelity design prototype. And so in the low fidelity design prototype, which we have, in the first line it is written paper prototype and wireframe. These are the low fidelity prototype, and mostly in design process, here the UI designers are involved in this process, and that is how we get the information architecture and the paper prototypes. And the next stage is where the visual designers actually involve here. The core visual design domain starts from here. Here we have the visual graphic design on that particular wireframe or the paper prototype. We start with the detailed mock-up, which how the website will look like, how the application will look like with all the colors and textures, and also the UI transitions will come into the picture. Here the designers, UI designers team with the visual communication designers. Then we get the higher fidelity design prototype. So here, as we discussed in the starting of the visual design methodology, that in iterative model, design stage and user testing stage comes together, and they can, from user testing stage we can again go back to the design stage and change something in the design if there is something wrong, and based on the feedback of the user we can iterate the design and again test with the user, and gradually the design goes to towards this maturity, and the design becomes acceptable and more user friendly in nature. And then finally, in the user testing stages, the tools and techniques involved is ethnography. We will discuss what is ethnography, FGD or the focus group discussion, and in ethnography the processes can be making questionnaire, making documentations and all these things. And so the deliverable is understanding the user's feedback on design and understanding what has to be changed in design if it is wrong, and whether the smaller iteration has to be there or the big modification has to be there, or it might even happen that design doesn't even work. So we have to again start from the beginning. So we again go back to the design phase, and then again do the design with all this paper prototype. Depends on the what was wrong in the design, if there is something based on user testing, and then again we come back to the user testing process. So after that the design phase is absolutely done, and with the agreement of UI designers and visual communication designer, then it comes to the developers, and the final development stage happens with the final development, where the developers will develop and the final outcome will be there. So here mostly, as we discussed this process, the stages earlier in the generic design methodology, and we will discuss mostly the tools and techniques and some part of the deliverables whichever required. So as we discussed persona, so to define persona, it is what we do in defining persona is we identify the target audience or the users or potential users for the final product. Final product in this cases, it is the web design. Product doesn't mean the tangible product design, it is the final outcome, or which is in this cases is the web application or web design. So here in these cases, in some cases users can be identified user group, and even in some cases we can also target some potential users who are not exactly the user, but after launching the website who might be included in the user domain. For example, in the case of shopping, we can see this if the website of the shopping online e-commerce website of a particular shopping site is not there, so the users are who can visit the shop, they are the user. But the potential user, if we develop the website of the e-commerce site, can be also the people who are remotely who cannot visit the particular shop, who can remotely access the online e-commerce site and purchase something from the particular brand. So they are the potential user of the final outcome, that is the website. So they will be included in the persona. And then the process of developing the persona is developing a fictitious character which represents the particular type of user based on demographic segmentation of the user, and there can be multiple persona in some cases based on the different stakeholders, if there are different stakeholders or user groups involved in the design. For example, if we are developing something for the some web application which is for the suppose for pizza delivery. So there will be the stakeholders will be the buyers who are purchasing the pizza. Even in the other end of the application, there has to be the pizza delivery shop. So they should receive some informations from the this application. Their web interface can be different, but both are the different stakeholders of the particular web application. So there will be two different persona. One will represent the user group, user who's purchasing, user one who's purchasing the pizza, and the next will be the user two, for persona for the user two who's delivering the pizza. And even for the multiple, even for different cases where the multiple stakeholders are available, there will be different personas involved. So what the persona do? The persona helps to connect the various design groups, designers groups working for the final product, like for UI designers group, visual communication designers groups. So it also connects the marketing group, which is who are not the designers, but with the designers, where there are UI design group, where visual design group, and that this design group also connects, the person also communicates with the marketing group as well as the web developer group. So from the marketing group, designers generally get the design brief, what has to be done, and the user need. Generally marketing group finds out what is the need of the people, so they give the design brief to the users, and also user find out to the designers, and the designers also find out what is exactly there in the user's need, and then they also pass on to the same thing to the web developers. So persona and scenarios are persona and as well as a scenario, which we will discuss, is very essential for the, communicating the marketing group, designers group, and the developers group. It also helps the designer as well as the marketing group and the developers group to communicate with the client. There can be a different client for the website. For example, for an e-commerce website which has the client will be the e-commerce, the owner of the e-commerce site, and the designers will be different. So they have to be in a common agreement of identifying who is the real user of the of the particular site. So all these different design groups, marketing groups, and the developers group as and the client has to be on the agreement of finding the particular user, and everything, the design, UI design and visual communication design depends on the particular user's need. So identifying user and making the persona, the right persona, is very important stage and the crucial stage for the web design. So how the persona looks like? So there will be an actual photograph of a user. So user's photograph and his age, location, and details has to be there. So he will the user photograph, the user will stand as a will do the role play or the stand as a communicator between the different user group, and they will the persona will make a clear communication if we add a photograph and all these details of a particular user. So this is a very important stage, and from that we move on to the scenario. Scenario is actually how each and every persona behaves in a natural context. So this is actually a story, a fictitious narrative of how user interacts with the product. In this case, this is a web or web application. So in the absence of the web application, what problem the users are facing, and in the presence of the web application, what help, what benefit can the user get, that has to be narrated in the section of scenario. That has to be built, and this also communicates between the marketing group, designers and the clients, and they also have to be in a common agreement that how the scenario will act and how the scenario will change if there is the website designed. So it predicts the effectibility of the website. So before designing, so we need how much impact it has, the website should do, and what is the task, particular task a website should do, and based on that everything like information architecture, the wireframes, everything will be designed based on that. So this is a typical scenario. It can also be a sketch, it can also be a movie, it can also be a storyboard. Where we can depict the scenario with storyboard, or just it can be just a write-up. Some of the advertisement which targets the user also directly derived from the persona and scenario of the final outcome. For example, OLX. So if you look at some of the OLX advertisement, there is a particular scenario depicted in the advertisement, and is a particular persona enacting in the scenario. In some advertisement, we can also see some of the advertisement directly is derived from the persona and scenario of a identified user. So there is a communication based on the communication of the designers and the marketing group. Marketing group directly adopt the persona and scenario which user designers and marketing group together have made. So for example of OLX advertisement, if you see the advertisement, the there will be a particular scenario depicted in the advertisement, and the persona will be enacting enacting in the scenario. So one of the OLX example, the housewife, a lady, needs some cash and creates clicks photograph of different old furnitures which they don't need, and upload that in the OLX, and they get sold. That is exactly what OLX web application does, and that is the scenario of the OLX web application. And the persona is a housewife who needs money and who can sell the who's trying to sell some of the old furnitures and trying to get something new in the exchange of the old furniture. So that is the function of the web application of OLX, and that is how the scenario of the web application is depicted directly translated in the advertisement. In many of the other cases, in other cases also, you can see the translation and marketing group directly borrowing the persona and scenario from the designers created persona and scenario. So ethnographic survey is also a tool of studying user. So that is the field visit. Ethno means people, people, and graphy is the how people. The term ethnography means how people react in a particular scenario in a natural setup. So in terms of design, what designers do is designers identify what problem people are facing in day-to-day life, what the web design, how the web design and web application can solve this. So this is how designers identify the need. So ethnography through ethnographic survey is actually the need of the user and persona and scenario is developed. So ethnographic survey is a broader umbrella, and under that, from that user persona and scenario is developed. So moving on to the next design stage, we'll first discuss the low fidelity design, where the UI design part is more, and also some visual, in some cases visual communication designers can add to the sit with the UI designers. So low fidelity design in this particular case of web design will be wireframes, which can be which is derived from information architecture. So information architecture, as here we can see in the graph, is nothing but a formation of structure of the web application or website. So here we have first the home page, which will open first, and from home page there will be links of the first which is there in the first row. The links will be available in the home page, and if we take this link, which is cars, in this might be a information architecture of a car website of a car. So from that car there can be different link of this, there can be different multiple links which will be there in the next hierarchy. So if we go to the next page, we can then go to the next next page, which is there in the next row below. So this is nothing but the structure of the website. So the when this is created by the UI or interaction designers, then we start UI designers or visual communication designers starts designing the wireframe. Wireframe is how each and every page, for example home page, will look like, and this is depicted by single line drawing, and a very quick prototype. It can be also designed by hand on a paper, or there are some softwares which is very user friendly, and quick wireframes can be designed based on that software as well. So this is an example of a paper prototype. This is very sketchy, very rough, and there can be some colors added to this where the visual communication designers play a role for selecting the colors. So but that is the most important is the information architecture, how this is translated in the first wireframe. So this quick paper prototype will be then be taken to the user's testing stage, because user testing stage and design stage will go simultaneously. So this is the first photograph, is the low fidelity paper prototypes picture, and this is the same thing how the designers are discussing with the users and testing the validity of the design. In the wireframe, each and every buttons, each and every informations has to be there. It might be in a very sketchy format, but all the informations in proper position and proper places has to be there, even with the written notes which will appear in the final website. So all the pop-ups, if we see here, this is a map based web application has been was on the process of design. So here the pop-ups and each and every small icons and all the details are there, but in a very sketchy format, as it is a low fidelity design. There is a software, there are some softwares which also helps to design a very quick wireframe. So one of the software is a Balsamiq, which I will show you. I will give a quick demonstration of the Balsamiq, and I will show you the interface of the Balsamiq. And here this is a Balsamiq generated wireframe. This is also very rough. The information, visual informations, visual communication layer of informations are less, but still you can see the icons, logos, the shape of the tabs, these are all decided. So here visual communication designers actually work with UI designers, but all the informations of images, buttons, tabs and everything is there in the wireframe. We go to the next process, which is user testing. So user testing, the low fidelity design prototypes should be showed to the user, and the interactions between the user and the design has to be documented, and based on that and based on the feedbacks the user give, whether it's a good design or whether do they like the design or what kind of changes do they prefer, that has to be documented through the feedback questionnaire and discussion with the users. And that again designers take the decision of based on that feedback, whether there will be a minor iterations or there can be a there has to be a major modifications, or a completely new design is required for the success of the for the user friendliness of the final website that has to be decided by the designers. So the process, user testing process is can be through photo and video recording, taking notes and questionnaire survey, feedback forms. So Likert scale is one example of feedback forms where users rate the design of particular different attributes of the design from 0 to 5 scale. And then eye tracking can also be a very useful method of user testing, which we also had a demonstration of eye tracking. Eye tracking is a process of ethnographic, it can be involved in the process of ethnographic survey, how people behave in a natural scenario, natural setup with the in the absence of the final design. And it can also tell you designers how users are behaving in the presence of the design. So that can also be recorded and documented, and particularly users are looking at which particular design elements, where are they looking at, that can be tested through eye tracking. So this is the previous process. The other processes, photo recording, taking notes, questionnaire, FGD, these are very qualitative in nature, but eye tracking is very quantifiable and objective. So we can easily identify the UI, whether the UI transitions, UI design and information architecture is proper or not. So here we can again see the eye tracking done on a particular page, how people read and which areas. So if you look at the testing result which we get from heat map, generated heat map from the eye tracker, which I showed you previously in the demonstration video. So this heat map deciphers that the red areas are read properly. Users these areas are attracting users attention, but some these areas didn't at all attract user attention. So from here we can see this part of the design attended users attraction, whereas this part didn't attend any users attraction. So from these feedbacks, from this analysis, we can again change the design, we can modify the position of the text, we can change the layout of the web page, you can change the buttons, breadcrumbs and all these UI design elements if required. So this is a photograph of a user wearing mobile eye tracker. So mostly web based designs should be tested with a stationary eye tracker attached with the desktop. But if we are trying to understand the interaction between a mobile web application on a mobile platform or in a tab based platform, or if we are trying to understand mostly in a virtual reality or devices or some signage design, advertisement which is visible in the public space, then we have to go with the mobile eye tracker. Here is a photograph of a mobile eye tracker. You can also search the how the desktop based eye tracker works. So next moving on to the high fidelity design, where visual communication designers part is more. Here in the high fidelity design, which contains colored version of the screens, where before going to the high fidelity design, we should definitely do a one round of user testing, because high fidelity designs cost more time, that also cost more money, and more money for the client. And so one round of user testing will prove the validity of the design. Based on that proved low fidelity design, we can then move on to the high fidelity design of the final product. So high fidelity design can be delivered in terms of finding first user's mental model. So high fidelity design actually contains the color palette, detailed color rendering and UI transitions. So that color palette should be derived from the user's mental model of the final product. Mental model is how that also we discussed earlier, what people think, what the target audience or the users think about the final design, and what kind of color schemes they are expecting in the final design. That has to be done in the ethnography survey and the questionnaire survey when we do the user research. So we should ask people what kind of color palette you are expecting, what kind of color scheme you are you will attach with this kind of website. That will be one source of source for the color scheme. Another will be the brand identity of the company. So if the company already has a particular color scheme, valid and established color scheme, then we should follow the brand identity of the company. That particular color scheme of the company's logo or company's branding has to be taken into consideration. And also, if the company's brand identity is well established, this will also affect the user's mental model. So if the company is well established between the users, the company's color and everything will be also there in the user's mind, and user will also expect that kind of color scheme, and that will reflect in the mental model of the user as well. So coming to an example, this example, this is a small work which has been done for for Snapdeal e-commerce website. This is not for Snapdeal, this is just an exercise which has been done for demonstration. So first we can see in this corner which is a balsamic wireframe, which is the low fidelity design prototype showing the wireframe and information based on the information architecture. So this is the low fidelity prototype. From here we identify what is the user's mental model, what kind of color scheme they are expecting, what kind of design style they are expecting, as well as what is the brand's identity, what kind of color scheme the brand also already has, and what is the platform of what is the design platform, what kind of paradigm has to be applied. So these things are there, and based on that, this is the high fidelity prototype over there in the corner, in the bottom corner. So high fidelity prototype exactly shows how the web page, website or web application will look like. So it contains all the color details of the of textures, shadow, and each and every buttons, and how the pop-ups will look like, even the drop shadows and everything will be there in the high fidelity design. So if we see the cases of this design, as we all know, Snapdeal has a color. This is the logo of the Snapdeal, we can see. So from the logo of the Snapdeal, the color schemes are derived, which is the cyan or the bluish cyan color, and the red color is derived from the logo because this is already a well established brand, and people through the user study and their users mental model analysis through the feedback, people also identify Snapdeal as a with these two color schemes. So these two color schemes are retained in the design, and along with that, to add in the background, there is two neutral color added with this color scheme, because in some spaces we need the neutral color which will act as a background. So this highlights, which is a very vibrant color which Snapdeal has, which can act as a focal point, which will draw users eye attention, and also we need some background color. So that is why a more neutral color, that is gray, and a dull version of blue is added to this. So here we can see the also because this is designed on a iPhone platform, so iOS this design style is also adopted, because iOS is this design style is also a brand's design style which is there in the user's mental model. So when we asked people that what kind of a design style you expect in an iOS platform who is a user of iPhone or iPad, they don't expect some design style which is there in the Android platform. They expect something which blends with the iOS platform. So iOS platform's style, which is skeuomorphism, which has to be applied in the design style as well. Skeuomorphism, as we already discussed in the previous lecture, that skeuomorphism is a style evolved from iOS design paradigm, which has a particular intricate texture, intricate shadow pattern, and beveled edges and gradient color palette in the design style, which is very different from Google's material design or flat design style. So this has been adopted in the buttons, breadcrumbs, tabs, and overall textures and UI transition of the design. So we can see a proper drop shadow of added here, which actually will look mimics the actual page. So this is not there in the material design style of evolved from Google. So even the drop shadow and everything looks like there is a contour, there is a texture into the form. So that is also applied in the visual design style. So now I'll give you a small demonstration of the Balsamiq software, which can be used for wireframe design. So we can see this is the logo of the Balsamiq mockup software which we are launching. So if you see, this is the interface of the Balsamiq software, and here on the top we have different icons, different tabs. In one of the tab, if we go to the iOS tab, where already some iPad's format is already there. So we just click and drag. So there is already we have an iPad which is created in the Balsamiq. In some other versions of Balsamiq, we also have some different versions of iPhone. So iPad is there, we can select iPhone if we want to design on iPhone, and so the basic is ready if we are designing on the iPad platform. And if we are not designing on the iPhone, we are designing on different tabs and different formats, we can create just a rectangular shape from different rectangles. We can create a different rectangle. So I am deleting this. We just create a rectangle and we can start designing, and it also shows what is the rectangle's height and width in terms of pixel. So in that also, if we see, there are different shapes which we can add. Just click and drop. This is a button. We can elongate the button, we can change the button's shape. We can also add different tabs for toolbars which we can add and quickly create some mockups. So this is there. So you can right click and add different toolbars. You can change the position from this tab. You can even change the size. You can change the opacity of this. So you can see the opacity of this thing is changing. So if you want to create a toolbar in below some toolbar will be just a pop-up, so we can do that. And even here we can see different kind of buttons are also there. So you can see on off buttons, buttons, clicked buttons, different other buttons, day and calendar charts, everything is there. You can try Balsamiq, and all these things, menu bars and everything is there in the Balsamiq. So this software is a very quick prototyping software for wireframing. So this is also a free software. You can download Balsamiq from their website and start using this for quick quick mock-up prototype. After making this, you can come to the visual design, and on the Balsamiq software, from the Balsamiq software generated low fidelity prototype, you can start adding color and ask the users. Even from this Balsamiq software, you can take a printout and ask people, ask the target audience, the users, what is the problem with your design, and identify and rectify the design and start moving on to the higher fidelity design.